Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings Podcast. I'm your host, Paul. Today is Sunday, June 22nd, 2025. This is episode 44, and super excited about this week's guest. We have Juanita, all the way from Santa Fe, New Mexico. How you doing, Juanita?
I'm doing great, thank you.
We had a lot of good feedback from our conversation last week. I had a lot of people tell me about it, people in my inner circle, and then people would send a couple emails in saying how much they enjoyed it. Kind of opened their eyes to a lot of stuff. I really appreciate you getting on here and doing this with us.
No, thank you. It's my pleasure. And I'll tell you that having had you ask me to do this, it really is great for me because I get to go back and review some of the stuff and ask myself, how well am I doing with the traditions in my family life, Yeah. And sometimes I get to go, oh, yeah, you could have done a little bit better with that one. In fact, I had that very same situation happen this week with one of my kids. I realized that I got involved in something between me and this with her and her spouse, and it's just like I had a little more input in something that she'd asked me for. But really, did I really need to say all that I said? No, I really didn't. So next time I see him, I get to say to him, I let myself get to a place where I don't want to be, which is I don't want to be that mother-in-law that interferes or is gets. I just don't want to do that. Wow. And I've been really blessed because of this program. I believe that I have always had an incredible, beautiful relationship with all the spouses of my kids. And I think it's because of this program, Yeah. And I get to make amends to them. If I overstep.
Yeah.
And thank goodness.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's funny you said that because I had a similar situation with a conversation I had with my mom, and I feel like I added a little more than what I probably should have. And it's just funny you just said that because you just brought it back up in my mind. Yeah, for the listeners.
Well, it's always going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I said it's always going to happen because we're just human beings, being human.
Yeah. And for the listeners, we have, this is the second week. Last week we did Traditions 1 and 2, and Juanita is a 39-year member of al-anon. And
it'll be 39 years, July 2nd this year.
Wow, so coming up.
And you know what? Alcoholics Anonymous is so thrilled that I'm an al-anon. They're doing this party for me up in Vancouver.
Nice. No, heck yeah. Heck yeah, that's special. Nice. In Vancouver, so you'll be in Vancouver on the 2nd, huh?
Yeah, I will be, yeah.
Nice. Very cool. And so last week we did Traditions 1 and 2, and then this week we got, today we're going to do Traditions 3 and 4. And what we're doing is the traditions in our family lives, or the 12 traditions in our family lives. And, it's just been a cool, interesting conversation last week. Cool to get to know you more. I've always heard, I've been friends with Tom, your husband, for years. And I've always had friends. We've had friends in the inner circle, but we've never actually had a conversation not much until a couple weeks ago on here. So it's been cool.
I've enjoyed it too, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah. So, what I went back to listen, and, what we talked about that kept standing out for me was how important it was, to go through the recovery portion, the recovery process, the steps, and waking up to, a loving God, really. I mean, there's how important that role is before you could even consider, applying some of these principles that come with the traditions. If I don't have a loving God in my life, and asking for guidance and getting my guidance from that, it's going to be a real. The truth is, I may not. Some of these questions wouldn't even seem attracted to me, or some of these principles, right?
Absolutely, I'd have no interest in it. I really wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because I'd still be interested in getting my own way.
Yeah, exactly.
feeding my own ego, which is. I always said I'm not much of a person with a big ego. I found out pretty differently,
Yeah. Yeah. So this week we're going to do traditions 3 and 4, and if you want me to, I'm going to read. I'm going to read. Last week I didn't have, or the last time we met up, I didn't have the traditions in front of me. I'm going to read the short form to 3. Okay.
Okay.
So it says the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. And of course the long form is a little different than that. What is the al-anon?
Okay. Al-anon tradition 3 reads like this: the relatives of alcoholics, when gathered together for mutual aid, they call themselves an al-anon family group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. The only requirement for membership is that there be a problem of alcoholism in a relative or friend. Wow. So it's pretty different, you know?
Yeah.
So the first thing that it tells us is that we're gathered together for mutual aid. And so when I took a look at this, I thought to myself, what the heck do they even mean by mutual aid? Well, first of all, it really brings about more inclusivity, I think we're a family, a group. So it's about, am I inclusive in my group? And I think one of the first questions is, I have to ask myself is, do I even want to be in a relationship? And the reason I say this is because I was doing a step workshop out of my house many, many years ago. And one of the women there, when we wrote inventory, she was reading her inventory, and she was talking about a relationship and how she wasn't in a relationship. And I asked her the question, do you even want to be in a relationship? And she looked at me like I had grown a new head. And the next week, when we got back together, she said, that question really threw me. Excuse me. And I said, yeah, I could tell. And she said, I'd never been asked that. And when I sat down and I prayed about it and I meditated, I realized I don't want to be in a relationship. It's too hard. She was like in her late 60s and stuff. And she says, I just thought I had to be in a relationship. I thought that's what you should just be doing. And she says, my life is really simple. It's nice. I can do whatever I want. I think about my kids and, the grandkids and stuff like that, but I can do whatever it is I want to do. So, the truth is I don't want a relationship. Tom and I have been married for 46 years. And August 19th this year, we will be married for 47.
Wow.
That just blows my mind, Paul.
Wow.
And it hasn't been easy. I mean, there's been long periods of time where it goes really well. We do really well. We have these little struggles. We have power struggles, if you can imagine, in a marriage.
Yeah.
Go figure, right?
Yeah.
But we have these little struggles. We have these little, I want my way. But 47 years, we've gone through just about everything that you could possibly go through, beginning with active alcoholism and the family disease of alcoholism, between ourselves and in our families. And I remember I went I was in my first journey through the steps, and I didn't start my step journey until I was 2 years in Al-Anon. And I found myself with my back up against the wall and in a place where I believe, I call it, I was blessed with the gift of desperation. And I asked a woman to sponsor me, and we got up to the 6th and 7th step. And I'd had this little problem with jealousy, right? Excuse me. And she said, I don't know what to tell you about that. She says, I don't have that. She says, we've been talking about it for a few weeks. And she said, I want you to go see my psychologist. I can't remember if it was a psychologist or psychiatrist. It doesn't even matter really. But she said, I want you to go see him because I don't know what to do with you with this, you know? Mm. And I said, okay. So I went to the psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever he was. And I started to talk to him about my childhood. And he stopped me before I was even like 2 minutes in. And he said, you know, I don't need to hear all of that stuff. He said, that's not going to help you at all. And I looked at him and I thought, all the books I've read, all the movies I've seen, it's like, surely you have to hear about all that and my parents and my suffering, my God, you know, and all this blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And he said, no, he says, I don't need to hear that. He says, I don't want to hear it. He says, you're not going to heal and change your life by going over that over and over again. He said, how you're going to change is by how you live the rest of your life. Mm. And I was like, wow. And he said, but you know what your problem is? After some time, you know, after about a week or two, he said, your problem is you don't know if you want to go or if you want to stay. Mm. You don't know if you want to stay in this relationship or if you want to go. And he was absolutely right. I didn't know that. And I didn't know that until he said it, you know, and even then it took me a little bit to like take it in and to register and to admit that, you know? Yeah. And I was always 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Mm. And I'd kind of been like that for even before coming into the program, because what if it doesn't work? Because I was expecting him always to like, he's either going to die because of the being a heroin addict or his alcoholism. He's going to get into an accident and be killed, you know? So it was like on the lookout for the next Mister, right? And so I was never fully in. And once he got sober, I still wasn't quite fully in because, you know, he wasn't changing the way I thought he ought to be changing. Or as quickly as I thought he ought to be changing. Both of those things, right? Yeah. And so it's like, it's not like I'm actively doing anything, actively pursuing anyone, but it's like, I'm paying attention. I'm looking, right? Just in case. Yeah. Just in case it doesn't work out. And because I also didn't want to claim responsibility for our relationship. I didn't want to claim responsibility for our marriage. If it ended, I wanted it to be because he was going to end it. Then I could be the victim. I could be the suffering martyr, you know, and it's all his fault because that's the way the world worked for me way back then. Everything was his fault. And so when he said that to me, I was like, okay. So I went back to him probably like the fourth time I went back to this guy. He said to me, because, you know, I did with him like what I did with my sponsor. It was like, started talking about him and what he wasn't doing and how he wasn't being. And he said to me, he said, you know, he said, this is what I want. He says, and I might have said this last time we did this. I don't know, but I'm going to say it again. He said to me, I want you 6-7 years from now to be absolutely positive you've done everything you possibly can to make this marriage work. Wow. I don't want, when you're looking back and you've ended this relationship, to have doubts. He says, I want you to be absolutely certain that you've done everything you possibly can to make it work. Wow. I said, okay, yeah. And he said, so this is what I want you to do. He says, I want you to go home and I want you to be as kind and loving and considerate and generous and just be a loving wife, the most loving wife you can possibly be. And I left his office and I was fuming. And I got home and I got on the phone with my sponsor as soon as I walked in the house. And I said, do you know what that SOB said? And she said, no, I have no idea. And I told her what he said, and she got really quiet. And it's that old thing that if your sponsors get quiet, those old timers get quiet, you're about to hear something come out of their mouth, right? And so when she got quiet, and then when she spoke again, she said, she said, you're paying him $125 an hour. Why don't you try doing what he tells you?
Yeah.
And the crazy thing, Paul, is that until she said it, I didn't even register that I was paying this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how out of touch I was with anything having to do with me.
Man, I get
My stuff was all about someone else.
Yeah.
And that was, in that respect, it was all about Tom and how he's not doing what he's not doing, how he's not behaving, how he's not saying the right things or whatever. I was so out of touch with me because I was so hyper vigilant with what he was up to or not, or, he was still my great obsession.
Yeah.
And we're talking about maybe 4 years in the program and maybe 2 years, a year and a half with sponsorship under my belt. I'm still so obsessed, so focused on him.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, clearly I'm not getting any sympathy from her. And I thought, well, I'm paying for it. I might as well do what she says. So I started doing, and I can't even remember what I really called it, but it was like love and run, right? Love and run. And so he'd be sitting at the kitchen table, right?
Yeah.
And I'd walk behind him, and I just, kind of pat him on the shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
pat him on the shoulder and then keep walking. And I never dared turn around to see the look on his face or anything, because I didn't know if he would be rolling his eyes. Maybe he'd been, giving me a hand gesture. I mean, I had no idea what he'd be doing, and I didn't want to see it. I just wanted to start doing this. And so I did that. I did that for quite some time. And then it was like a little squeeze, with one hand and both hands, and then it would be a little hug, and then all from behind and never looking back. And then it was a peck on the cheek, and then it would be like, I love you, how you doing, babe, that kind of thing. And it probably went on for a couple of months, I think. And then one day I'm walking behind him, and I didn't do anything. As I'm walking past him, he asked me a question, and he said, don't you think blah, 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 dear, honey, babe, whatever it was. I can't remember what it was. And I stopped dead in my tracks. And I thought, oh my God, this thing just might work. This
Wow.
thing, what's up with this? Because I never expected to have a term of endearment like that come from his mouth, And I realized that I didn't even need him to do that. Something about me was beginning to change.
Yeah.
I was beginning to behave in ways that were kind, that were caring, that were loving, that were considerate. And I was changing,
Yeah.
I was beginning to want to be that way. And it was just coming about like second nature.
Yeah.
And I can't say that it was like that all the time. It was sporadic. It was quite sporadic for a long time. I was better at it. And it began to change things going on in our lives, And we both began around that time, I believe, to want to make our relationship work, and that meant that I had to let him grow and let him change at his pace, not at my pace, not the pace I wanted him to grow. And I'll tell you that there were years still, like I would say probably about maybe 6 to 7 years later. I remember, in my house, I'd written some inventory and I was pissed at him for whatever reason. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, al-anon doesn't work. Al-anon doesn't work. You've been brainwashed. You have been absolutely brainwashed by the stupid people here in the program, going to these stupid meetings, and it's like, you're just a sucker. And then I thought, oh, no, that's not true. Al-Anon works. It's AA that doesn't work. I've changed. It's AA that doesn't work because he has not changed. And of course, the minute I said that or thought that to myself, I started to laugh because I thought, oh my God, of course he's changed. He's not drinking. He's not drugging anymore. He has changed. what is going on with you? What's going on with you that you're making him responsible for how you feel?
Yeah.
And it can happen in a moment.
Yep.
It can happen, and I don't even plan it. It just happens. It's a reaction,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's a reaction,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no thought behind it. It's just instantly, I'm there. I'm there. I'm blaming. I'm judging. I'm criticizing. And the minute I do that, that loving God is not present because it's me running the show one more time.
Yep.
So, how can I gather together in our family for mutual aid if I myself am not relying on God for my aid? There's no way. There's no way. Because what I'm doing then is that I'm saying you're responsible for me.
Yep.
And he is not responsible for me or how I feel, you know?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm responsible for my own stuff. And it was just so important. You know, I remember this probably about 10 years ago, maybe not that long, but some time ago. I'd been talking to a young woman in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'd known her for some time, and she'd been married for about 8 years, 9 years, something like that. And she and her husband had a little boy, and he was probably about 8 at that time. And we'd been talking, and she called me one day, and she said, you know, she says, I need to talk to you about something. I said, okay, great. And she said, you know, my husband has all these guns. He has these gun collections. He's a hunter. He does this. He does that. He has, you know, just whatever you is out there. She says, I feel like he's got it. And I said, okay. And I said, so what's going on? And she says, well, I don't like it. She says, I don't like that he has these. I don't approve. I don't like it. And I don't want my son to grow up with all of these guns and stuff. And I said, okay. I said, so what do you want? She says, I want him to get rid of them. I don't think he should have them. I don't think it's safe. I don't think it's right. You know, it completely goes against my beliefs and my values. I said, okay. And so she was thinking that, you know, she didn't say, I feel like the marriage has to end, but she clearly was really bothered with her husband and his guns. And so I asked her some questions, and one of the questions I asked her was, well, tell me something. I said, does he keep them lying around, you know, that your son could access them and he'd be in danger and he could pick up one of these guns, one of these rifles? And she goes, oh, no. She says, nothing like that. She says, he is so careful. He is so responsible. She says, he has them in the garage and they're in the gun safe, and he has like other gun safes that holds even more. She says, he has all these safety precautions. And so as she's talking, I'm thinking, okay, she just doesn't want him to have them, you know? Yeah. And so I prayed, because what do you do when you get something like this, when you don't know what to say, is I've learned to pray. So I prayed, and I said, could it be possible that you can use this opportunity of you and your husband having different values, different beliefs about, you know, guns and rifles, that you can use this as an opportunity to teach your son how to have a relationship where you communicate and you can have peace and you can have love and you don't have to agree on something. Nice. And that wasn't from me, you know?
Yeah.
And she said, well, I don't know. And clearly she didn't like what I had to say, you know? Yeah. And so, but anyway, long story short, I think they've been married now for going on 20 years.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah. And
so I don't think I've had a conversation with her since then.
Wow.
You know? And, but so do I want to be in a relationship, you know, for mutual aid? This is about both of us.
Yeah.
You know, for our mutual aid, for our kids' mutual aid, for their, are we equal here? Are we going to share this responsibility openly? You know, what is this mutual aid that we're about in our relationship? So I was, I'm trying to think because I think I wrote something down and now I can't remember where I put it. Um, Let me see if I find it. This is all I want. Anyway, so do I want to be in a relationship? Do I want to be in a relationship? Because sometimes we stay in relationships just because we don't want to be alone.
Yeah.
I've certainly done that. Or I'm in a relationship because I think I don't want to have to be responsible financially. So it's like I like the idea of having somebody help with the finances, or I like somebody helping with the kids. And the crazy thing is that as a family member, a lot of times we're alone because we're alone.
Yep.
The alcoholic is drinking, the addict is using, and so really I'm doing a lot of this stuff on my own. And I don't even see it because I'm so frightened to be by myself.
Yeah.
That I would rather be uncomfortably comfortable in my
Absolutely.
pain, in my anxiety, in my frustration, in my denial, in my fears, than to be by myself.
Yeah.
So do I really want to be in a relationship?
Yeah, it's a good question. And also, like, it comes with I didn't even know how to answer. I wouldn't have known how to answer that until after I was, married. I'm learning how to do that. Like, literally, as the years go by, I'm learning it's a two-way street. Oh, and I do that through conversations like this and, running into, a lot of heartache and, hardship or whatever, and suffering enough pain where I realize, like, holy crap, actually, it is a two-way street, right? It's the relationship itself. Like, I like how you're talking about, am I just lonely or am I need help? Do I need help in certain areas? But at the end of the day, getting into the relationship, you don't even know what that even really means until you're in it. I didn't until I started discovering on the way, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Wow.
One of my kids, it was very interesting for me. Before they got married, they knew they wanted to get married, and before they got married, they went to a counselor just to talk out stuff. And I thought, oh my God, how brilliant is that?
Yeah.
To talk about the important things in their life, what they wanted, what they didn't want,
Nice.
about working together. And I just thought, what a way to start the relationship,
Yeah. Yeah, it's good
I
stuff.
thought that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Really, absolutely. So often, and I think we talked a little bit about it last time, peace at any price, and so we want to avoid controversies, and it's impossible to avoid controversies. We're not the same people.
Yeah.
We're completely different.
Yeah.
Tom and he's him and I am me.
Yeah.
And for a long time, for many, many years, I would just agree with him, because I didn't want to have to deal with the fallout if I didn't agree with him.
Yeah.
And when I started to voice the fact that I didn't agree with something, he really thought that I was angry with him or that I was telling him that he was wrong. And it took many conversations of me saying to him, you know what, honey? I said, I just don't agree with you. I said, you have your opinion and I have my opinion.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you wrong and me right and me wrong and you right.
Yeah.
We do not have the same ideas about this. We do not have the same beliefs.
Yeah.
And how are we going to work around this? Is it a make it or break deal? And it's the same thing with sponsorship. I've had conversations with my sponsor about certain things. And I remember one time specifically, she says, oh my goodness, she says, we've been together an awfully long time. She says, do you think we can move through this? She says, I hope we can because I really love you and I care about you. And I said, oh my God, absolutely. But what I knew is that if I didn't talk to you about this and how I felt about the incident that occurred or the words, the conversation, I said, I couldn't have kept on working with you. Because there'd have been something between us, and that's the thing is that there can't be anything between me and my husband, me or my sponsor, because if there is, there's no God. There's no God. And how can I move through these difficulties if God isn't present?
Yeah.
It's not about avoiding controversy. It's about bringing that loving God into the relationship so that we continue to want to be together because we're talking about stuff that is problematic.
Yeah, I get that for sure. And that's taken years for, like, me and my wife have been married now for over 6 years, right? And when we first met, we were, 6 months sober, something like that, and we were best friends for a couple years, right? We got to know each other. We were meeting buddies, we'd go to a lot of AA meetings together. And, over that couple years, we both started seeing how, like, she had a sponsor, I had a sponsor. I started getting in touch with a loving God. She did the same, and then we kind of met in the middle through that process, which was, I think, a big, huge part of, like, our relationship. But even that, it's been years before we were able to actually sit down and have an actual conversation. Over this last year or so, where we're able to have a conversation without getting real threatened, right? Mm-hmm. And being able to realize, like, oh, she's just sharing her feelings with me. She's not necessarily telling me I'm responsible for it or any of that, but I perceive it that way, right? And it was a situation where, like, as I started seeing how, like, I would start sharing certain stuff with her and that she would get threatened about certain things, I would be able to take that and kind of, thank God for a loving God, right? And principles where I was able to, at least, I realized that these are conversations that we needed to have, but I was able to be considerate that when I'm approaching this situation, she is definitely threatened, right? Mm-hmm. And I was able to, consider that with the presence of a loving God, right? And bring that into the situation, and it's been just over this last year when we were able to start conversating about certain stuff like that and be productive with it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. There's been several times that we've gone to counselors throughout the years. The first time was not the first time. The first time was when he was still drinking. And the psychiatrist said, she said after several meetings with her, she says, I was talking to my supervisor about your case, and he said, I can't work with you anymore. He says, until the drinking stops, I can't work with you, and she says, once the drinking stops, then we can, get back to do this. And I was so furious with her. Because this was like in January, and in December of the year when we were going to her, I'd made up my mind that I was going to get divorced. I really was. I said, it's over. We'd gone to her sometime in December, and I said, it's over. We're done. I want a divorce. I'm through. And she said, Tom said, it's Christmas. I'm not going to have my family. I'm going to be out in the streets. And, and so I blamed the counselor for talking me into staying, and later on, when I really got into doing step work and stuff, I called her and I thanked her for it, because it wasn't but maybe 6 months later, if that long, that Tom went into treatment, and not that I didn't make it happen. She didn't make it happen. What we did was we sat down and had a conversation, and we said, something's got to change.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. And he said, well, I'll go to treatment. And the truth is, he was sick and tired enough, been through so much of the difficulties of his drinking and drug use, that he met his own bottom, and and then here we are today, Yeah. So and throughout the years, there's been times when we've gone to see some type of marriage and family therapist or individual therapist or what have you. And one time was when one of our kids, our youngest kids, attempted suicide, and we had to go in, and they put her into a 2-week adolescent psychiatric unit. And when she was done with that, she had like a 6-week intensive every day therapy all-day session. And then we'd go in once a week, and we'd meet with all the other parents of the kids who were in that. And then we'd meet we'd meet as husband and wife together. And then our daughter would come in. And that was pretty intense. It really intense. One of the things that I will remember forever that she said to us was, she says, you guys are good at talking. She says, you talk about a lot of stuff. She says, the thing is that after all the talking, she says, you're not very good at taking the action.
Wow.
And it was like, oh my God. And she was right. She was right. We can talk something to death, but just like in the program, we can talk and talk and talk, but until I take the action, nothing changes.
Yeah.
And so, what action am I doing to stay in contact with this loving God that I've got to bring into this relationship that's based on mutual aid, helping each other? And what mutual aid is that for me? It means that we grow together. We love each other. We grow together. We help each other be, we, I guess, not help each other, but allow space for the other person to grow and be all that they can be in every way,
Yeah.
and to love and to just blossom. And for me, that really is what mutual aid means. And for me and Tom.
Yeah.
And when we all get together as a family, it's there. Can we be there for the whole family's mutual aid? Last night we went to dinner with a couple of my grandkids, and one is engaged, and they have a little boy, and they put their marriage on hold and for a while now, and a couple of the other grandsons, and we just had a beautiful time. We just sat there. We had dinner, and then we just sat there and talking and catching up, and everybody had their individual conversations, and then they'd move to somebody else, and then we talked together, after a while, and it was just lovely. It
Nice.
really was a lovely thing. Nobody had to do anything different. Nobody had to be perfect. Nobody had to act in any certain way. The baby wasn't expected to be perfect. There was a time with my mother-in-law that if the kids weren't absolutely perfect, oh my God, it was just like, you are the worst parents ever,
Yeah.
And it was the old thing of like, to be seen and not heard,
Yeah.
and it was just a lovely way to come together last night, and the only requirement to be in our family is that we say your family. We say your family. And when Tom and I are together, it's just us. And when other people come in, they're family, and our oldest grandson, this one is, he is, our oldest son married a woman who had, they got married when he was 2 years old.
Wow.
And this is our oldest grandson. And they've divorced, and he remains today our grandson.
Yeah.
He
Nice.
really does.
Yeah.
And he says, one of the fondest memories I have, one of my best memories, is being at your house and playing with some of the stuff that you guys had for us. And it's just about inviting people in and making them welcome and including them.
Yeah.
Am I really doing that? And for us, it's been a long time. It's taken a long time. And I think we're better. Can we improve? There's always room for improvement, always.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want always God to be at the center of it. And several years ago, we had to go again to a marriage counselor and an individual therapist. And, because we were at a point where I didn't know if we were going to stay together. And it was really, I was at a point where this might end. This really might end, and we had to come to a place where we had to realize, ask ourselves, do we both really want to be in this relationship or not?
Mutual. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do we both want to be in this? And, we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect.
Sure,
I'm not perfect. Tom's not perfect. No one is, so there's going to be stuff that happens. And I always have to be at a place ready to have God with me and to ask these serious questions, and not react out of fear, out of anger.
Yeah.
And to trust that God's going to have me and have us and carry us through, if we're going to stay together, carry us through the tough stuff. And we had some hard conversations. We really did. We had some serious, serious conversations. And they went on for some time. And, well, here we are today, several years later, and we're still together. And
Nice.
I believe that we're closer today than we've ever been. You know.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, think of what just came to mind is like, if you don't have, faith or, enough experience, which is pretty much, faith, pretty much. If you don't have, like, I always tell people whenever they first come into recovery, like, one of the parts that sucks about early recovery is you don't really understand that, like, this stuff really works. You get what I mean? Like, you don't have enough experience to understand, like, oh, okay, God does have my back and he takes care of me. I just got to learn how to get out of the way and start applying principles and, and start doing certain stuff to, healthy actions to move in a healthy direction in my life. You don't have that experience. You're so hopeless and beaten into you're hopeless to where you don't trust any of that at the time. You're agnostic all over the place. Right. And
Absolutely.
So it's just interesting to, think of like having a conversation like that. 'Cause there's been times where like struggles over the years where, like, although there was a lot of unpleasant emotions or whatever, I still understood that, like, however it was going to turn out, God's always got his hand in things, right? And hopefully I can.
Always.
I love how y'all the al-anon position on this is it's almost like taking on responsibility, like what you're saying right there is taking on the responsibility of your actions. What are you doing, and what am I bringing into this? And because it's so easy to, I would imagine, being in Al-Anon, being an Al-Anon, being married to someone that's, been doing all the stuff I did for years. I could imagine how easy it would be to have that position of like, I'm not the problem right here, right?
Absolutely.
So I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that. And me and Harold were talking a couple weeks ago about how, that the victimization, and we were talking about how we're not even disregarding. I think a lot of people have, I myself anyways, I had this old idea that, like, when I started going through the forgiveness process in the fourth step, I thought it was like, oh, if I let go of this, it means I'm condoning this person's actions. That's not what it is necessarily. It's like we've all had some issues in life where we've been, people have caused harms, whether it's physical, sexual, whatever, right? At the end of the day, when I'm standing in this position of like, this victim card, for lack of a better term, it's painful for me, right? And it's so easy to be in a delusion in that because I'm thinking the problem is outside of me, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's me not taking responsibility for what's going on with me, and absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's just, it's a very lonely place because I'm pushing everyone away when I do that because there's no room for anybody else because all I see is me.
Yep. I heard Alan Watts. Alan Watts said, I don't know if you listen to any Alan Watts, but he said, you wake up to the fact that you're doing all this, he said, you realize that if you're not doing all this, then you can just blame it. You can go back and say, well, I am the way I am because my mom dropped me on my head, right? And then her mom was this way to her, and go all the way back to Adam and Eve, right? And he says, but you wake up to the fact that you're doing all this, and I love this line. He said that the present moment is the birthplace of responsibility.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That is so beautiful.
Yeah.
I was doing one of the workshops that I was doing, and we got to the fourth step. And one woman raised her hand, and I said, yeah. And she said, I said, do you have a question? She says, she says, you lied to me. And I was like, oh man, what did I do?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a room full of people we're talking about ego, right? It's like, oh boy, it's like, you're calling me out, and I said, really? I said, how did I lie to you? And she said, you didn't tell me that if I did this step work, that I was going to have to be responsible.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I said, oh my God, I said, that's no lie. I said, I didn't lie to you.
Yeah.
I said, this is where we're at right now. This is the fourth step.
Yeah.
We write down our resentments, and then we take a look at where I'm at fault. Where am I wrong? What am I up to?
Yeah.
And for me, one of my biggest character defects, one of my biggest wrongs was always that I couldn't talk about stuff. I had conversations, but they were just conversations that I had in my head.
Yeah.
There was no verbalization of it.
Yeah.
And if I have to be able to share my deepest thoughts, my deepest feelings, my beliefs openly and without worrying about somebody blaming me or criticizing or using them against me at some point, or there's no solving these difficulties.
Yeah.
You know, I used to not want to talk because I thought Tom will use this against me somewhere down the road. You know, if I say this, he's gonna say, yeah, well, you blah 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 blah. Remember, and it's like, and then point the finger back at me. And I had to realize, Paul, that my God had to be bigger than any of my fears of Tom retaliating or dominating me or his emotions or anything. So I needed a God, and it took a while. It takes a while.
Wow.
My sponsor said, you didn't get here overnight, you didn't get sick overnight, you're not going to get well overnight. And I not only did I want to get well overnight, I didn't want to have to do any work to get well.
I get it.
Let's just do it. Just do it.
I started getting inspired as I was going through the process, how I started seeing how, like, man, there's some freedom in this by taking responsibility, you know what I mean? And thank God for that, because, I was convinced for a while, like, all the problems in a lot of situations, what was outside of the, from me, right? And my first sponsor, my relationship with him was huge on, like, I was able to trust the man enough, and I was able to start sharing enough stuff with him to where he was able to put a completely different light. I'd call him about whatever the situation was, whatever it was, right? And he would always be able to shine a completely different light on it, right? And I started seeing how, like, man, I am freaking I'm BSing myself, right? Like, I am full of crap. I am sitting here talking crap to myself all day long and blaming it on everybody else,
Yeah.
And that was a lot of freedom in seeing that. I like what Bill C says. He says, whenever you start to see some of this stuff, if you don't have a level of humor, right, it can be pretty depressing, right? Yeah. So
That's
true. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have to allow Tom be who he is and go at his pace, and I have to be in a relationship with somebody who will allow that for me too. And some of the stuff that we've struggled is when I haven't wanted him to do certain things, and the same, and vice versa, and so we each have to have this relationship with God that will carry us through doing the things that we know are important for each one of us to do, regardless of the consequences, because there's always consequences. My sponsor often says to me, there's consequences with everything I say, everything I don't say, everything I do, everything I don't do. I have to be willing to live with those consequences. And anymore, and for the longest time, I am not willing to live with the consequences of not being truly myself, and doing as God would have me do, and I have to be willing to let him do that. So one of the questions for me is always, who am I? Who am I? That's one of my big questions. And am I relying on God, or am I relying on myself? Do I consider Tom my equal? And am I respectful to him? Because for a long time, I was not respectful. And am I being authentic? Am I being exactly who I am and not pretending because I want somebody to like me, to care about me? And I did that for a long time. And, if they don't like me for who I am, that's just, that's too bad. It's too bad.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, we've had we've had some divorces, some separations, and, I believe society has changed in many ways that, sometimes the kids get married, sometimes they don't get married, and they're in long-term relationships. And am I inclusive? Am I inviting whoever they're with, into our family? Or do I hold such strong opinions and judgments that I don't want to include them because I don't believe it's right? And I think that's really important. I welcome. My kids don't have to have the same values I have. We don't have to agree on those values. Are they kind? Are they considerate? Are they loving people? Are they respectful people? Absolutely. Is the person they pick for a spouse or a partner a loving, caring, respectful, considerate person? Do they accept my grandkids, and love them? And if they do, you come right on into my family, man, because you are so welcome. I invite you in and you're a part. Whoever my kids pick to be in a relationship with, you are now part of my family. My sponsor has said often, she says, we draw our family circles too small. We draw our family circles too small.
Wow.
And my family circles have expanded. They've expanded, and we have a lot of family, and that's our blood family, that's our step family, and which we don't consider steps. As I mentioned to you, my oldest grandson, and his, and that includes our sponsees. Our sponsees are part of our family, and our kids don't have to consider any of them as part of their family. They get to pick their own family. And that's where the fourth tradition comes in, is that we are all autonomous. Everybody gets to be who they are, and they don't have to do or be as I think they should. Boy, what freedom for everyone. And I don't think there's any better way to be respectful of someone than to do that.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah. And I'm going to read the alcohol. We'll roll into tradition 4 with that. I'll read the Alcoholics Anonymous real quick. Tradition 4: each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole.
Yep. Al-Anon says, tradition 4: each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting another group or Al-Anon or AA as a whole. And, we include AA because we try to keep anonymity for the alcoholics, because we think it's really, really important. And we cooperate with Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says that specifically in our tradition 6, if I'm not mistaken. So what is tradition 4 about? It's about autonomy. It's about I am me and you are you. And I'm being respectful of you enough to let you be who you are. It's about balance. It's about respect. It's about being courteous. And I really believe it's a lot about control. Can I be willing to let go of my control of who you are and how you should be? A long time ago, you don't hear this as much, but a long time ago, I used to hear in meetings, don't fall in love with their potential. Don't fall in love with their potential. And I've kind of changed that a little bit, and I say, don't fall in love with your illusion of their potential, because I'm in a fantasy about their potential, and it can be with any person on this planet. It can be with my neighbor. They're going to be the best neighbor, oh my God, once they do this or once they change this, they're going to be, and it's my idea of who they could be, rather than the reality, I don't like reality. I've never liked reality. It's taken me numerous journeys through the steps to go, this is reality. This is reality, kid. It's like, let go of the fantasy. It's what's the truth here? And I love the doctor's opinion. The doctor's opinion, he talks about we can't tell true from false, right? That's like on the second page or third page. I can't remember exactly. But he says, can't tell true from false, And then it says the alcoholic is in full flight from reality. Oh my God. Oh, if the alcoholic is in full flight from reality, and I'm busy chasing after him. What in the world does that say about me?
Yeah.
What does it say about me? You know, how much am I in full flight from reality, trying to catch hold of him and hold him accountable, or change him, or make him be different? You know, it's, who are we? Who am I? Who are they? You know, we each have to be ourselves. And it's about me letting go of my control about who I believe they should be.
Interesting. Yeah.
Um, so I'm not attached to Tom in any way. We don't have to think, do, or believe the same. Tom, many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, started to smoke cigars, you know, and he had been a cigarette smoker. Excuse me. He'd been a cigarette smoker for a long time. And the gift he gave himself on his first birthday, sobriety birthday, was to stop smoking, and which was huge for him. And so we started smoking cigars, and I was afraid that he was going to start smoking cigarettes again. So I was not crazy about that at all, and I judged him severely, and I criticized him unmercifully. And I did it for a long, long time, I hate to say. And he kept smoking, and I was not nice about it. And really, when I look back, I didn't want him to smoke cigars because I wanted to have some control of him and his life and his health. And he wasn't like smoking all that much, but it was enough. There was another thing really important. And this was key. It gave him great pleasure. Great pleasure. And there was something about that made me furious. I did not like that it gave him great pleasure and that it relaxed him. It was like alcohol, like when he came into Alcoholics Anonymous and they picked him up and wrapped him up in a blanket and made him okay. And it's like, that should be me, you know, that should be me doing this, you know? I've worked hard, and here this was something that was giving him pleasure. And it's like, I didn't want him to have that pleasure, you know? And how respectful is that? How courteous is that? How balanced am I in my thinking to feel that way? It's all about control. You know, a lot of control and a lot of fear, you know? And so are my choices about my behavior, about my attitudes, do they affect somebody else? Do they affect somebody else? You know, this tradition makes me think about more than just me. It makes me think about another person, you know, and how do my actions, how do my behaviors affect them? And that doesn't mean that I have to do everything to make them okay. That was part of my problem as a family member. As a family member, I took care of people's emotions. You know, as a small child, I took care of my mother's emotions. I tried to make her okay, try to make her happy, try to ease her pain. You know, my dad was an alcoholic, and so I remember as a small child seeing her cry in her room, and I'd go and put my arms around her and try to make her okay. You know, and so my whole life has been about taking care of people's feelings. And so for me to speak up and say what's really on my mind and what's in my heart, and be responsible, not to make them change, to be responsible to vocalize what's going on with me, to be vulnerable, regardless of what they say or what they do. And let them have their emotions. And that means sometimes doing things that some other person doesn't want me to do. You know, one of my kids lived 3.5 hours north of us here in Colorado. And I used to, you know, want to go and visit. And Tom would say, oh, no, I can't go, so don't go. And the weather's bad, the roads are bad, you know, wait till I can go. And I would say, okay. And I said, and I did that for years. And then I'd be angry with him. And the truth is, who I was really angry with was myself because I was going against my values.
Wow.
My value as a parent, as a grandparent, is to do certain things, to be present in my kids and in my grandkids' life. And I couldn't do that. I, my fear of Tom's anger was still um, more than what I could. But I didn't have God's power
Yeah.
to pull off being the person, the grandma, the mother that God would have me be, right? And so I would blame him, and he didn't do it. He didn't do it. This is all me, So I'm separate from him. I'm autonomous. And when I started to finally have enough strength with God's power, I was able to go and say, and not be angry with him and say, honey, I know you don't want me to go. I know you're worried. I know you're concerned. I'm going to go. And I'm a safe driver. I've been driving for a very, very long time. I'm really safe. I'll be careful. And I'll call you, when I get there and do these things, and I started to grow, and he started to grow because I didn't acquiesce, and he had to deal with whatever feelings he had come up for him,
Yeah. Yeah.
whether about me or the fact that I was doing something without him. So it's been an interesting process to bring tradition forward into our lives together,
Yeah. Interesting. That's I think I can definitely recall just different situations where I could relate to that over the last couple years in my relationship with my wife, and it's interesting though because it's one of those how do you know what you don't know, right? And I don't think naturally at least I wasn't. I shouldn't say people aren't, but I was not raised to react to or respond to situations like this, right? It was I was always taught like I'm responsible, and no one actually physically or verbally said this to me, but they showed me their actions over the years, anyways, where it was like, I'm responsible for how this person takes this. I'm responsible for this. I remember when I first got sober, it was like 6 months. At the time it'd been 10 years since I had a driver's license, right? And I finally, about 2 years after I got sober, I ended up saving, enough money, got my license back and all that, and got my license in car. But during the first year of my sobriety, I was scared to death to go back home to Chattanooga, where my family was for the holidays, right? And so, after my first year, then going into my second year of sobriety, it was like 6 months away, right, to Thanksgiving, right? 6 months away, and I'm sitting there like in my head thinking about how, I'm going to have to say this, and I'm going to have to tell them I'm not going to home, and I'm not going to do this and all this. And it's 6 months down the road, right? And I'm sitting here thinking I'm responsible for their feelings, right? And I'm, like how they're going to take this situation, I'm responsible for, right? And I'd been living like that for years, and there was a lot of I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. I had to grow. It was one of those. It was a muscle. I had to, how you where they say if you build a muscle by resistance, right? It was one of those situations where I had to go through it and go through it and go through it to where I was able to start trusting God and start seeing the truth. But that was just my knee-jerk reaction to life, and it still can be. It was like that my whole life. I was 33 at that point, 34, right? So I definitely get that, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, and part of that is the thing of wanting to have people like me and not have to worry that I've upset them and they're not going to like me. I had a sponsee one time. She was on her 8th and 9th, and she says, I've got to make amends to, it was a member of her family. And I said, okay, so tell me what's going on. And she said, well, she says, he's very, very angry with me, this family member. And I said, okay. She says, yeah, she says, he's angry with me because I wouldn't lend him money. And I said, well, how much money are you talking about? She said, it was like, 100,000. I said, well, that's quite a bit. And she says, yeah. She says he wanted to, get a house or something. I can't remember what it was exactly. And she says, and he was really angry with me because I wouldn't lend him money. She says, he hasn't spoken to me in 20 years.
Wow.
Whoa.
Wow.
That's some anger, right?
Yeah.
And I said, okay, so let's take a look at the step 8 and 9, and what does it say? And it talks about harm, right? And I said, so let me ask you something. What harm did you cause him? Really, for you saying no to him and not lending him the money, what harm did you cause him?
Yeah.
And she didn't cause him any harm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's he would say, I couldn't buy the house that I wanted because you didn't lend me money, and you could say that caused harm. He had a place to stay. That wasn't really a legitimate harm.
Yeah.
And so we talked about it for some time, and she finally realized, she hadn't caused him any harm. The person that she'd been harming really was herself, because she'd always given and given and given and given. And never getting paid back, which is quite typical for the family member. We give and give and give and give and give, the money, the love, the whatever it is that the alcoholic needs. That's what we do. We'll give. My sponsor says everything is an asset until it becomes a liability. And we give until it becomes a liability. Mark H. said one time, I was hearing him talk, and he said, you family members are thieves. And I thought, what in the world are you talking about? And he said, you are thieves. You steal my experience. And we are. We've done that. When I give advice that's not asked for, or give more advice than what really they ask for. It's like I'm trying to make them do different, be different, so that I'll feel okay.
Yeah.
So that I'll feel okay.
Yeah.
And their emotions aren't tied to me in any way whatsoever. Their emotions are theirs, and so I on many occasions, I took on their responsibilities. I became the arbiter. I became the diplomat, the peacemaker, the fixer, trying to make everything okay. Because I thought I knew how things ought to be. They should be this way. Because if they're the way I think they should be, then I'm going to feel okay. And it's very selfish, very selfish. There's in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous on page 88, one of the promises it says is that we will become more efficient. We will, oh heck, I'm going to look it up here real quick because I'm going to blow it. I've gotten so used to saying it as a prayer that for me to actually just say what it says is hard. Okay, so it says, we become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. And so my prayer every single morning for probably the last at least 10 years, if not more, has been, God, please, today, give me the ability to be more efficient. Keep me from burning up energy foolishly, trying to arrange life and the lives of others to suit me so that I'll be okay, to ease my anxiety, my pain, my fear, my frustration, my unknowing, my feeling, because that's why I do it. It's all about me. And do I care? Absolutely I care. I do things that are none of my business. I get involved in ways I have no business getting involved because I want to make me okay. So I'll take a responsibility for somebody else that is not my business. They're responsible for their stuff, for their consequences. In al-anon, we say, oh, no, I'm not going to get it right. I hate when this happens. Don't get old, Paul. Give me a second. Give them the response, give them the courtesy, give them the respect to make mistakes and not fix it. And then I'm paraphrasing, I'm not getting it right.
Yeah.
And let them succeed or fail on their own. That's it. Let them succeed, or give them the respect to succeed or fail on their own.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And that's probably been one of my greatest defects of character with my children, is that to ease my pain, to ease my fears, I have done probably more than I needed to do. I mean, and as a parent, you give. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can do more than what I need to do,
Katie.
to ease.
Yeah, I get that. Katie P, when she was talking on a few weeks ago, we went over the steps 8 and 9, and she was on one of her men's letters she read on the podcast, or it was either her, I think it was her sponsees, but she had said that it was, cloaked in a good motive, right? Like, wow, that's it. Hey, always
Absolutely.
in collision with people, even though our motives are good, right?
Always. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this tradition is about having conversations, with the people I'm in relationship with, so that I can present my thoughts, my views, my opinions, my values, and they can present theirs. And keeping the door open for each person to be their own person.
Nice.
And can we have a loving God that allows us to have these conversations, so that you can be fully you and I can be fully me. And so that you can grow and be your person and own your your successes, and own I don't want to call them failures. I'm going to call them experiences.
Yeah.
One of my kids says, "Oh my God," she said, "I feel like such a failure." And I said, "Honey, you only fail if you don't get up and do it. The greatest courage is getting up one more time and doing it. That is courage."
Yeah.
And so we have to let people be. I have to let people be who they are and appreciate them for who they are. My great grand sponsor used to say, "I love you because of your defects, not in spite of them."
Yeah. Yeah.
That's huge. That's huge.
Yeah.
For a long time, I called BS on that. I was like, "No, that's totally wrong. Yeah, there's no way." And the truth is, with people, it's like, sometimes you just have to laugh and go, "Oh, they're doing that again,"
Yeah.
And it's just like, and I love them so damn much. I really do. And that takes that takes some detachment. It takes some God, and it takes some detachment, to let somebody be. My sponsor has said to me over the years, over and over again, she says, "We do detachment with love, not by amputation."
Yeah.
Not by indifference. It's detachment with love.
It's like what we were talking about, the active. Remember last time we spoke, the difference between being passive and active. It's passively or actively. It's like, am I actively carrying this awakened spirit going through life? And I can watch a situation and not put my hands in it sometimes, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
me and Katie talk about taking the higher road. It's like, can I see? I always say, I heard a guy a few years ago say, when I see the opportunity to keep my mouth shut or keep my hands out of something, take it. Right? And it's funny because you don't always see the opportunity, right? But if you can see it, it's a blessing. Right? It's like, okay, smile at it and just be like, all right, God, thank you.
Yeah, that's true. And this is a tradition. This tradition is one that I think gets misused and used as a weapon more than any other. Well, we're autonomous.
Yeah.
We're autonomous. I am autonomous. So this is what I want. This is what we should do, be it in our groups or in our homes, in our relationships. It's like, this is what I want. This is about me, and I need this. And the saving grace with this is that we have to bring all the other traditions into this. Am I going to cause harm? Which is why I love how Al-Anon reads, except in matters affecting another group, or Al-Anon or AA as a whole.
Yeah.
It's like, it's what Tom and I are doing going to affect our kids? Is it going to affect our grandkids? Is it going to affect anybody else?
Yeah.
Because as a family, we really have to take a look at some of that,
Yeah.
and or am I bringing them into something that is none of our business? We had a nice little conversation about that probably about a month ago regarding, making our wills and stuff like that. And we had to talk about, this is our will, we don't need to involve our children in
Mm.
this.
Mm.
This is about us and our decisions, and our kids have nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's cool. That's all. So thank you so much. It's been cool. It's eye opening. I love to hear. I love to hear just the al-anon side of things. It's a different take on it. I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's been really great to be able to do this. I really thank you for asking me, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you
Been
so
good.
much. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love how when we started talking about this tradition forward, it starts bringing the awareness that the decisions that I make are, they do affect other people whether I realize it or not. The question is how does it affect them, right? I mean, they
Absolutely.
can, and
Yeah.
just brings that awareness. It goes back to unity, right? And
Yeah.
it's just this is all stuff that I just never would have considered. What really brought me into the idea of doing this podcast or any of these podcasts was that I started experiencing certain stuff where I was like, man, why aren't we talking about this stuff more? Like why are we not having conversations like this? So that's what kind of inspired me, was to have conversations like this and get it out there and share it with people, see what happens with it, right? And
Absolutely. Because we're not different. We're not so different from each other.
no,
We really all have some of the same problems. There may be a little shift in them,
yeah,
but they're pretty all similar.
yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah. It's crazy because the traditions was. I can't say they wasn't talked about much, but I'm going to say they wasn't talked about much. Yeah, when I was first getting sober, and I had such crazy experiences with it. It was just like, wow, yeah, it's a game changer. Well, thank you so much. And you want to add anything else to any of this?
I don't think so. I think that I put it all out there, and I got nothing left.
Thank you so much. This has been awesome. Our next
Yeah.
date is for the listeners. We are going to meet back up. It's going to be a minute. It's going to be Sunday, August 10th. Traditions 5 and 6. We'll be meeting up then. And I would love to talk to you also about doing a possible, like maybe a little prayer meditation. Maybe we could do one day in the future.
Oh, I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
be cool.
It's so funny. There's one on YouTube that I did years
I know.
ago.
Yeah. It's got hundreds of thousands of views on it. Yeah. Seriously.
It's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that.
Yeah, I remember when I first met Tom a few years ago. I'd shared him. I found out that was you through him. Right? Yeah, I had searched Alcoholics Anonymous meditation, and there's literally, I think, like 100 or 200,000 views on that. It's crazy, maybe even more.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's funny. When I first heard about it, this guy was telling us about it, and he said, "Yeah, it's like it's some alcoholic guy," and and I was like, "What? How dare them? How dare them take that?" And then afterwards, I started laughing, and I said, "Well, there's that ego again." I said, "God, whatever,
Yeah, that's funny.
You are anonymous. You are anonymous.
Yeah. And did you say that you did that at a Fellowship of the Spirit? Is that what you said?
Oh my goodness. My father had just passed away like 2 weeks before. And it was in New York, the New York Fellowship of the Spirit. And Tom and I had been invited to do a weekend step workshop there. So we did the whole weekend. We did steps the whole weekend.
Yeah.
And that was a meditation that I did that weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
They
Yeah,
took that piece out.
that's awesome.
Paul, the crazy thing is that there's times that I'll sit down to meditation, even today, and my head won't stop, and I'll put that on, and
Nice.
just because it just like it calms me down.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, thank you so much, and I will be staying in touch with you before August. Are you and Tom going to the international?
Yes, we are. We'll be
Nice.
there.
Nice.
Are you going?
No, we're not going to go. But I was just curious. I know a lot of people that are going. It's coming up in a couple weeks, huh?
I know. We're excited. We weren't sure if he was going to be able to go or not. So we're really thrilled that it's happening.
Yeah.
So that's oh my God, I'm so grateful.
Nice. And you got On July 2nd, you're going to Vancouver, huh?
We are going to go on the 1st, and we'll come back home on the 7th.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Nice.
so we'll be there for a few days. Okay.
Very cool.
So we are going to do this August again.
August
Choose
10th.
the date.
Yeah,
August 10th. Yeah, I got it.
Yep, that's the next one. And then, let's see, we got August 10th and then August 24th. Yeah. And then we'll go from there, yeah.
Yep, I got it. I already had on my calendar. I thought I did, but I thought I better check. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Paul. You have a wonderful rest of the day.
You too.
Okay.
All right,
Bye-bye, my friend.
Bye.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.